Hello everyone, and welcome to the Middle Ages channel. Today, we're diving into the life of one of the most essential and often controversial figures in a medieval village, the miller. Forget what you might have seen in fairy tales. The real story is far more fascinating. So, who was the medieval miller? Simply put, he was the man who turned grain into flour. This was a crucial job. Bread was the staple food for almost everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest lord. Without the miller, there would be no bread, and without bread, people would starve. This central role gave millers a unique position in society. Most mills were not owned by the miller himself. They belonged to the lord of the manor, the local monastery, or even the king. The miller was essentially a tenant leasing the mill and its equipment. In return, he had a monopoly. The peasants on the manor were legally required to bring their grain to his mill, and his mill alone. This was called the right of soak. Trying to grind your grain at home with a handquern was often illegal, and lords would actively seek out and destroy these illegal tools to protect their income. This monopoly was both a blessing and a curse for the miller. On one hand, it guaranteed him a steady stream of customers. On the other, it made him a target of suspicion. Peasants were always worried they were being cheated. And were they? Well, let's just say the stereotype of the greedy miller didn't come from nowhere. The miller's payment wasn't in coin. It was taken directly from the grain he was grinding. This was known as the multure, a portion of the flour, typically around 1/16 of the total amount. The miller would use a special scoop to take his share. And this is where the trouble started. How could a peasant be sure the scoop wasn't a little too big, or that the miller wasn't taking a few extra scoops when no one was looking? Chaucer's Canterbury Tales gives us a famous and very unflattering portrait of a miller named Simkin. He's described as a brawny, brawling, dishonest man with a thumb of gold. This phrase meant he could press his thumb down on the scales when weighing the flour, tipping them in his favor and stealing a little extra for himself. This image of the thieving miller was widespread. Songs, poems, and stories from the period are filled with complaints about millers who overcharged, gave short weight, or mixed cheaper grains, or even chalk into the good flour to increase their profits. While some were undoubtedly dishonest, life as a miller wasn't easy. The mill itself was a complex and dangerous piece of machinery. Watermills harnessed the power of rivers, while windmills, which became more common from the 12th century onwards, used the wind. Both were filled with massive, heavy millstones, complex gears, and fast-moving parts. A moment of inattention could lead to a crushed hand, a lost limb, or worse. The constant noise inside a working mill would have been deafening, and the air thick with flour dust, which could cause a lung disease known as miller's cough. The miller had to be a skilled craftsman. He wasn't just an operator, he was a mechanic and an engineer. He needed to know how to dress the millstones, that is, recarve the grooves on their surfaces to ensure they ground the grain efficiently. This was a painstaking job that required precision and specialized tools. He also had to manage the flow of water or adjust the sails of the windmill to control the speed of the stones. Too slow, and the flour would be coarse. Too fast, and the stones could overheat, scorching the flour and risking a fire from the sparks. Flour dust is highly flammable, and mill explosions were a real and deadly danger. Beyond the technical skills, a miller had to be a savvy businessman. He managed the mill's accounts, negotiated his lease with the lord, and dealt with a constant stream of customers, many of whom were already suspicious of him. He needed to be strong too. Sacks of grain could weigh over 100 pounds, and he'd be heaving them around all day. This is why millers in popular stories are so often depicted as big, muscular men. Because of their unique economic position, millers often sat somewhere between the peasantry and the gentry. They were generally better off than the average farmer. They had a steady income that wasn't solely dependent on their own harvest. Some became quite wealthy, able to afford better food, clothing, and housing for their families. A miller's house was often attached to or right next to the mill, making his work and home life inseparable. His wife and children would likely have helped with the business, managing the customers and keeping the books. The mill was more than just a place to grind grain, it was a social hub. People would gather there while waiting for their flour, exchanging news and gossip from across the manor and even neighboring villages. The miller, at the center of this flow of information, was often one of the most well-informed people in the community. However, this prosperity and knowledge came at a social cost. The miller was often an outsider, respected for his skill, but distrusted for his power. In a world of tight-knit, interdependent communities, the miller stood slightly apart, a necessary evil in the eyes of many. This isolation, combined with the constant accusations of theft, could make for a lonely existence. Proverbs of the time often warned people to be wary of millers, lumping them in with other distrusted figures. So, the next time you see a picturesque old watermill, remember the man who worked inside. He was an engineer, a businessman, and a vital part of the medieval economy. He was strong, skilled, and often wealthier than his neighbors. But he was also a man who walked a fine line, constantly balancing his own livelihood against the suspicion of the community he served. The life of a miller was complex, dusty, noisy, and dangerous. A daily grind in every sense of the word. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the miller's life interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Middle Ages channel for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments which medieval profession you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next one.